I think first it starts with the number one, finding the right people, people that not only take this seriously but have passion to step into a situation that might make them uncomfortable. That where they have to make decision points to protect their customers.
As a normal user, you're going to just say, okay, what do I need to do for you? And they'll have you download a legitimate tool so that they can remote connect. Well, the technology's not going to pick up on that. It's a legitimate tool that's used in the environment. So once the attacker gets in, they start doing things within the environment.
I think this is the first time that we've seen civilian companies lead the way against criminal organizations.
Welcome to a new episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline. I have with me Josh and Tyler, and we're going to be talking about the analysts on the front line and try to uncover a little bit of some of the secrets that are just not obvious about the work they do. So thank you for coming back on. Please reintroduce yourselves and tell me a couple of things about your experience. So, Tyler.
Yeah, definitely. Tyler Baker, the Director of Global Security Operations for the MDR service. Been with Bitdefender a little over 6 years as part of the MDR service. Personally, though, I've been in military operations for the last 20 years, supporting different levels of operations, counter-narcotics and counterterrorism operations. So, looking forward to talking about cybercrime from the front line today.
Cool. And I'm Josh Armstrong, the Senior Manager of Global SOC. I've been here a little bit over 6 years as well. Kind of came in a few months after Tyler started here. And I oversee our security analyst and as well as another team called content management team. So our analysts are obviously working our detection cases and responding to our customers. And we have our content management team who's really focused on kind of the data that we're getting and making sure it's usable to our customers. My background, I was a Windows administrator for quite a while before I got into cyber. And then before that, did desktop support. So I've kind of worked my way up to the chain over the last 20 years. So
there's a lot of mysticism about what analysts do and their work. And I'd like to uncover some of the secrets of the day-to-day operations in a SOC with these gentlemen who know all about it, who have great stories. And to be honest, even though, we know each other, we talk about what's going on, we've been in this for a long time, even I don't know a lot of the super cool and interesting stories. So I'm actually going to sit here with you guys and with all of you to learn and to hear interesting, fascinating stories and positive outcomes from actually being on the front line, because it's heroes that don't wear capes, right?
100%. And it's a very interesting thing because we work in a technology company and everyone talks about the technology, but it's the humans, it's the people, the bodies sitting behind the scenes that are the ones not only dealing with incidents and the attacks that we see but developing ways to mitigate those effects. And it's really cool to have to work along those people that have that ability, that have the skills, that knowledge to be able to fight this and to fight cybercrime in a way that like everyone kind of focuses on the technology, but really it's the people. It's the people, the human-led operations that make it effective and make technology useful to the people that we're protecting. And for a person who's been around that community for a long time, I've been 20 years working in the intelligence community and combating different criminal organizations around the globe. And what I notice is, it's all about money. That's really what they care about. They want to affect customers and, they don't really have the morality around it. And to see civilian companies out there, especially in the cybersecurity world, fighting and going, using humans and technology to fight that and combat that is a really cool thing, in my opinion. So, yeah, really excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of the glorified pictures of a SOC or an operation where there's fancy screens and all these analysts and experts right behind big computers looking at big numbers on a screen. But how is it actually? Give me a sense. Of course, whatever we can share, but what's going on down there? How does a day in the life of an analyst look like? What's the collaboration look like? And maybe have an example of an actual situation where things stop being the day-to-day operation and there's an incident that requires more attention. What's going on? So
I think first it starts with the number one, finding the right people, people that not only take this seriously, but have passion to step into a situation that might make them uncomfortable, that, where they have to make decision points to protect their customers, and then have the analytical mindset to be able to walk through the steps and understand, this is how I need to understand what happened in this investigation. This is what the attacker did. This is how they laterally moved, and then go, all right, where's my next step? How do I continue to analyze this to make sure that I'm taking the proper steps to protect our customers? And so, finding that person that has that right analytical mindset is something that Josh and I take very seriously. And then we can work on, the technical skills, growing that understanding of the technology and the analytical process to make them better to understand. But, finding the right people to come in and that have that passion, that drive to be able to protect their customers, because they might get in front of, the customer. They might get in front of, have to deal with complex attacks, and it's something that we've never seen before out there in the real world. And so people that, can walk through that, understand it, pivot in the right places, are desperate, and we need a lot of those in the SOC, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, understanding, how these individuals think outside the box, especially like when we're interviewing people. Sometimes we ask different questions that may not even have to do with cybersecurity, just understand how they analytically think in order to, handle some of these detections and some of these alerts. Because as we all know, attackers are constantly evolving, right? And so it's not always going to be the same every time. And so you want to make sure that these guys, think outside the box, so to speak, and can kind of look at different situations. But, a day in the life of an analyst, they're coming in, we're looking at detections, and it could be anything. You got to think about all the industry verticals. For instance, you have schools out there. There's a lot of kids and teachers and people on these computers that are looking at email or trying to download games or do all these things, right? And we'll get detections on anything. And so we really have to be able to understand, is it legitimate or is it an attacker? Understanding the backside of that, and being able to communicate with the customer is so important. And like I said, thinking outside the box. As attackers do new things, you have to adjust and evolve to those things. And our big goal is always to get in front of the attacker and stop them without them knowing, without tipping them off, right? And so there's a lot of times where you're thinking about how to do that without tipping them off, as there's new attacks every day. So
how much of that is communication between you guys and the customer, or coordination and stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, it starts with that knowledge base, that understanding the baseline of our customer's environment. So every detection that our analysts get, they have to go and understand and study kind of the customer. Have we seen this type of attack before? Does this look like normal admin activity, or is it pretty obvious that this was like a phishing or unauthorized software in the environment that is now launching suspicious commands and suspicious activity? And so they take that understanding and they go, all right, knowing this information, should I take an action? Should I respond? And and some of those actions are pretty serious. Like, we could stop and shut down an environment from being able to communicate out. They might, it might pose a big business risk, but we might be stopping that company from making money. So we have to take that into account on the actions that we take and make sure that they're deliberate and they're the right action that we need to take. And then transparency, communicating that information to our customers, because they want to see the value in what we're doing. They want to see the expertise. And we encourage and support our analysts to make those decisions, to communicate it properly to the customers, and then to interact with them. Let them know why we're doing it, how we're doing it. Ask them questions, get as much information so we truly understand the threats that we're seeing day in, day out. Right. And so it's very important that we're communicating with the customer, and not just to show them the work and the value that we're doing, but to show them the expertise that's sitting there. They want to know that they have a great team that's on their side, that they have the partnership in place to be able to protect their environments. And so we encourage our leads and Josh and I to get on customer calls, to interact with them, to show them, like, we're here to help you. And the more that we interact, the better the outcome is.
Yeah, generally there's a learning phase when we onboard a customer. So we typically say around 30 days or so to really start to understand an environment. That's one thing where we collect data. We're communicating with customers, building their knowledge base, putting exclusions in for things that we know that are legitimate activity. And so there is that learning phase. The more customers can communicate with us, the better. We like that, obviously. We think as, we're one team here in this together. And so there's a lot of communication that goes between us and our customers because we're not on site for the customer, right? We're there,
Right.
we're protecting them. We don't always know that they have a custom script doing, different things. And so the communication is extremely important for us.
Because I find it fascinating that, every customer, of course, verticals might be similar in general, but then every customer has their own custom setup and have the proper situation, their custom situation. You have to learn each particular environment to be able to, best analyze what's going on in there. Is that a repeatable process, or is it just a lot of hard work?
It's great. Like, that's a great question because is it repeatable? Yes, but is it custom and does it have intricacies with every new customer or new environment that we're looking at? Yes, 100%. Every environment's different. There's no two the same. Just like a fingerprint. It seems like everyone does something a little bit different. And so yes, our analysts. That's the biggest thing about why human-led operations are so important and why the analyst is so important. Is because a lot of them have backgrounds who have been and developed these environments in these different customer situations. And so they have that background, that understanding, have been the IT, been in those admin departments, have set up, these web services and web applications and server environments for these customers. And so, they go, this is normal. This is how I would do it. Now, why is the customer doing something different? Why did they set it up differently? And then how would an attacker get in? And that's that knowledge that we want to encourage, and why it's so important that we find the right talent to be able to do that, to protect our customers.
All right. Yeah, no. And we were talking earlier, I think, how many people might compare you guys to law enforcement, like, the cops fighting the bad guys, but and maybe a better comparison might be even to firemen, where there's a big fire hose, and you're just trying to douse a big big fire, or even scenarios where it looks like you guys might be similar to aviation, where there's checklists and procedures and very strict rules, and all those things need to be followed in a certain order. So I mean, there's no pin that I want to put in any placard about it, but describe it yourselves so we don't have any more confusions here. I just want to
So I think,
get a sense of it.
in my opinion, I think this is the first time that we've seen civilian companies lead the way against criminal organizations. The cybersecurity companies out there right now not only collect data about these cyber criminal groups, but they're building capabilities to combat them. And normally you see that in the government, that, or the military. That's where you see the action arms, and you see police that will show up to the door and arrest a bad guy. You never really see civilian companies leading that in the front line here. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed with cybersecurity companies is that not only do they have capabilities that are unmatched and that are truly forward-leaning to protect the customers that purchase them, but they have the analysis, the people behind the scenes that have passion, that are looking to stop and protect it. And knowing that they don't get the law enforcement arm to back them up, they have to take the right step. They have to protect. And firemen is probably the perfect example of that. They show up, to douse a fire, to stop a threat, to mitigate the effects of an ongoing situation. And I think that's the same thing that analysts deal with day in day, is that they're coming in, starting their day, getting into detection, knowing that, one of these times I'm going to have to make a decision on, stopping an attack from going through. And it might be as simple as resetting a credential, or blocking an IP, or stopping a process that's running. Or it could be as crazy as isolating a host, stopping an environment from communicating out. And they know that, that decision might stop a ransomware attack, or might stop something going on that might further compromise them in data theft, and that company might lose intellectual property. So, like I said, it's funny that we're in a place, in a time where we're seeing analysts, this human-led analysts, and the technology piece being led from this, like a civilian group, civilian organization. Traditionally, I think you'd see, against cyber criminal groups, law enforcement arms combating that. And
yeah, and of course, a lot of people will see the effects of a long, drawn investigation where doors are being busted, but that's So that's what I'm kind of trying to dispel here. But because I'm pretty sure that's, you know, the general public or you know, somebody who's interested but hasn't really been inside an operation, doesn't really know what's going on. And I'm like, well, can we share something that's more interesting from inside? And I know we can. So to that effect, Josh, is there ever a quiet day at the office?
Yeah, there are. There can be.
Okay.
We like quiet days. Generally, though, I mean, we're fairly busy. But there are quiet days out there. But we have to always be ready. You know, even quiet detection, so to speak, can turn into something major, right? If you don't handle it quickly. You know, and for us, a big thing is our process and procedures, constantly trying to improve those and keep up. You know, as a firefighter might learn, you know, it might be better to take this route to get there right next time versus taking this other route where there was traffic so I could get there quicker. Same kind of thing in the SOC, you know, as we learn how to get in front of attackers and stop things and realize that, hey, this process may not have been the best, let's improve it. That's one of our things we're constantly doing, is improving our process and procedures. So on quiet days, we're capable of maybe investing a little bit more time into some of those items as well. So quiet can all depend, right? It might be quieter on the front line with detection pieces and alerts, but we're very busy doing a lot of other things. And so, you know, it's super important to continue to stay on top of it, whether it's quiet or not.
So what happens when stuff gets down? When there's a red alarm? Is there a big red button you guys press and start scrambling, or what's going on?
I think that's what happens. There's a big red phone in the SOC that gets
right.
You know,
it should be, right?
Get directly to the president, and we're able to now. You know, that's where that process and procedure come into place. So you know, our investigations. So like, let's say, you know, we see a phishing attack or we see an interactive attacker in the environment who's launching, you know, PowerShell commands, who's trying to elevate their privileges and try to pivot and move laterally in the environment. Analysts will then go, this is obviously not normal for this environment, based off of everything we've already talked about, you know, that understanding the baselining of a customer environment. We go, yep, this isn't normal. This is definitely outside of the normal working hours of this user. So let's take action. And so we're going to declare an incident, and, you know, there's no big red, no phone, no big red button, but there is, you know, buttons with our technology to go and get the right people in contact, you know, to establish the communication line to the customer so they know that they're in an incident. So they see, you know, that this is a serious threat. We might be asking them questions, might be actually gathering more logs and information, telemetry, to understand the attack better. And then during that's investigation, you know, we're going to, you know, truly understand how the attacker got in. Did they exploit some vulnerability, some new 0-day that's out there, or was it, you know, someone clicking on a phishing email and that's how they got in? And so we'll be investigating and determining the best eradication methods, you know, whether that's, you know, removing files, cutting off access, resetting credentials, whatever we need to do to really stop that attacker from moving on and being able to exploit the environment any further. And then, you know, once we feel that it's contained, and what we kind of end, like what we're achieving there is, you know, once we see the attack stop, we no longer see any other suspicious activity, we've removed all the file, there's no longer any persistence in the environment, then we know the attacker's out of there. And we'll kind of watch and monitor and, you know, really focus, hunt in the environment, make sure that we really have them out of there. And then, you know, the analyst will kind of go, all right, reevaluate their hypothesis. Is there anything else that they could do to protect their customers? Is there any other part of the environment that I should be focusing on? And then they're going to build that story, that true timeline of the events from beginning to end, so the customer can see, you know, what happened, how they got in, and then what we were able to do to stop that. And so, you know, it's analysts from from the beginning to the end, with technology, with context, with analysis supporting that to be able to protect our customers.
And that comes with, you know, providing solid recommendations. You know, after you look at that whole thing, technology is not going to give you all those recommendations, right? You might see things throughout the incident that happened, and that's where you want to suggest those things to the customer. And so part of that, you know, that whole overview of the incident from start to finish, what are things that we could have the customer improve on so it hopefully doesn't happen again in the future?
And to your point about the technology, I feel like a lot of knowledge about your work is mistakenly confused with beautiful dashboards and beautiful stats and all-encompassing AI-driven technology, and it just kind of works. So what I don't usually see is, again, the analysts behind all that data and telemetry and knowledge, um, and you guys, you guys just don't want to brag about it, I know, but you guys make it sound like it's just something that works. But I know it's not. So, for example, is there, it's a 24/7 operation, but you guys got to sleep and stuff. So how does that work? Um,
No, and I think you're talking to me is like the bane of an analyst.
didn't want to say it.
Yeah, so they're competing with the metrics. They're competing with, the how effective that you need to portray yourselves to be. And you're honestly, analysts are competing with technology. And, that's a massive amount of stress to put on those analysts because when they didn't meet the mean time to detect or the mean time to respond, but everything they did still protected you, you could be compared against that. And it's unfortunate because our analysts are so much more than dashboards, than metrics, than the amount of detections that they close day in, day out. They're humans. They have passion for this. They want to succeed, and so encouraging those analysts to be able to do that job, to go beyond and to look beyond metrics and metrics performance, to truly understand the environments, to make the right decision, to follow the process and procedures is really what I think most teams should focus on, and how they do that. Because as you mentioned, this is a high stress 24/7 job. And so, they're on shift for 10 to 12 hours a day. And then they have to make sure that they've passed on that information to the next shift so they can be as effective, that they're not lost, they're not confused. And so, to make sure that those things happen, we have to encourage analysts to be analysts. We have to encourage analysts to work as a team, to work alongside each other, and then encourage them to be as proactive and as communicative as possible to the rest of the team. And that really, if you can do those things well, and if you can push them beyond the metrics, push them beyond the mean time to detect, the mean time to respond, I think you get better talent out of it, and you get more success out of a SOC. And then they'll grow with you, and they'll make you better. They'll make the technology better because they have a passion for it. So when they see technology maybe not doing everything they need it to do, guess what? They can work with that team and they can help it make it better. And so, I think, Josh, he's the one that runs our SOC and our security operations center and deals with analysts day in, day out. But, I think we try to make sure that they feel that, we understand the stress of this world, but we're here to support you. We're here to make sure that you are as effective as you can be.
And they don't like to stay stagnant either, and we focus on training and making sure that we're capable of providing that training. So along with all the work that they're doing, analyzing detections, providing feedback to make the technology better, they're also having to constantly evolve, right? And so that's a whole nother almost job in itself, is the training piece, the learning the new tactics and techniques, and providing feedback even to that to help develop more training as they see new things come out. It's interesting to see some of our attacks that we get that the technology doesn't pick up anything with, right? And so being able to relay what they're seeing, provide that back to the technology and also even to training is so important. And that's a whole nother side of the job that a lot of people don't see. You're constantly learning. You're constantly having to evolve to different things.
Do we have an example, potentially recent, that we can share on that? Something that you guys gone through recently that technology did its best, but it was the analyst in the end that.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten attacks recently. A lot of attackers are starting to use tools that are already part of the environment or legitimate applications. Okay, for instance, we've had an attacker call into a customer before and say they're IT support. And as a normal user, you're going to just say, okay, what do I need to do for you? And they'll have you download a legitimate tool so that they can remote connect. Well, the technology is not going to pick up on that. It's a legitimate tool that's used in the environment. So once the attacker gets in, they start doing things within the environment. And that's where you have your indicators to tip you off to, hey, somebody's accessing this file. They're trying to launch this script that's normally not seen. What's going on? Now, that could be legitimate activity. It could actually be an IT person, and so understanding what's happening on the environment and also that communication with the customer to narrow down that, hey, this is somebody doing something, right? And so we've seen people use like Microsoft Teams before to make an external call into a customer, and they download, maybe TeamViewer or LogMeIn, some sort of legitimate RMM tool. Then they start using that to do things, right? Maybe dump credentials, at which point you might get some sort of tip. And so that can happen a lot where the technology just doesn't see it, And so, yeah, it's very important that we're staying constant, we're evolving, we're looking into the data, we're communicating with the customer to make sure that we are getting out in front of that attacker. You can sometimes see an attacker start touching files and doing things that really kind of tip you off to, I see where this is going. Let me make this decision. Let me take this action to stop it.
Yeah, I add on to that, like we've been dealing with one, won't mention the company, but a certain VPN vulnerability that, is being actively exploited and then using to launch Akira ransomware. And we've been seeing a lot of that. And I think about that one because I'm like, the benefit of an MDR, of a SOC, is that every attack makes us better. And so if we saw one attack with one customer, we analyzed it, we investigated, we eradicated the threat. But then if we see the same exact activity across others, we're more effective against it. And so, Josh mentioned continuously learning and evolving. That's the benefit of being in a SOC, is that you see all those different types of attacks and how they're evolving and what they've changed and what they've done differently. Yeah. But then you also notice the TTPs, the normal everyday things that they're doing to get in, and you can go, hey, I know that's bad. Yeah. Why? I just saw it 2 days ago on another person's environment. So this is how we're going to respond. This is how we're going to eradicate it. And then, we're able to essentially get faster and better because of that knowledge base, that knowledge of an environment that we're evolving to every day.
You know what I find really fascinating? Always talking to professionals on our podcast, guys like you do this day in, day out, and this is your job, and you just think it's normal, and I don't want to say frankly boring, but it's just like, hey, run of the mill. This is what we go through. So every time I'm trying to pull a great example, you think it's just a normal story, but I promise you, all these things that you guys run into every day make fantastic stories for people who want to learn. It's just that once you're in it and you're really good at it and you got it under control, it just feels like a task that's done. And I respect it, but at the same time, it's such a hard, for me at least, being here in my chair, it's hard to pull those stories out of people. So that's why I asked you to give me some examples. So you're not gonna get away with it. I want one more, please. Something that you can remember that happened recently. I love the fact that you said that a lot of that knowledge goes back into training and improving. So it's like a living organism, right? So all of these things happen in the end, and inform the next reaction to whatever the next attack is. So my purpose here when we started the conversation was not necessarily to humanize you, because you already are human, but to put a face and some understanding of what you guys are doing as an everyday kind of a situation. So I can't hype you up, so you have to hype up yourselves. So yeah, give me a couple of stories that you think or have been something you guys remember, positive or not, that changed your...
One thing that we're seeing a lot more now is ransomware attacks aren't really the same as they used to be. A lot of times they would get in and encrypt everything, right, and ask for the ransom. Now we're seeing where they're just exfiltrating the data and pulling it off. And so, we've seen recently an attacker reach out that was acting as an IT person and ask this person to drop this basically file transfer tool within their environment, and you don't really see that on the technology necessarily. And they're just sitting there pulling data off and grabbing that data, right? And so at that point, they may not even launch encryption. And so you don't realize what's happening. And so they have all this data now to themselves. And now they can reach out to the customer. We've seen one where the attacker emails the customer. They give them 3 files, example files, and they say, hey, we have your data. If you don't want us to release it to the public, you're going to need to pay us. And here's a proof that we have your data. And they may have 3 files, and they attach it to the email, and the customer will view it and realize those are actually 3 of our files. do they really have our information or not? Did they just get in and take some screenshots and acting like they did? And so now it becomes a whole thing of having to deal with this attacker of, well, what are they going to do with my information? What information do they have or do they not have? Do I pay the ransom? How do I handle that situation, right? And so that's something we've seen a lot more recently. And so really trying to get out in front of that is interesting. You know, you want to try to make these indicators that recognize some of these tools that are being used. And are they doing anything else? Sometimes the attacker doesn't really do much. A lot of times they do reconnaissance. Sometimes they don't. And so it really goes undetected.
Right.
And so, you know, you want to help the customer as much as you can. A lot of times you may not even have logs to understand what files they touched, right? Because you want to give the customer these files that they touched. They may have things like social security numbers, and at that point, you know, you need to be able to handle that in a certain way with your employees itself. And so, yeah, that's kind of something we've seen recently.
Yeah. I think showing the effectiveness of a SOC without those big, you know, large industry-wide attacks is hard. And you know, we all know about the Akiras, we all know about the, you know, social engineering, we know about the business email compromises, we know how, you know, it's evolving beyond, you know, encryption into data theft, and, you know, attackers are doing whatever they can to make money. But, you know, our analysts are doing a lot on, you know, before that even turns into something. They are the ones going and looking at a phishing email and going, this is a phishing email, deleting an email and moving on. You know, and you know, what would have happened if it went undetected, unmitigated? Well, probably ransomware. We all know that, but you know, that's what they're doing day out, protecting our customers, and that goes unnoticed. That goes you can't show how the value would have translated into something that probably stopped an attack happening. And so, and the same thing goes with, you know, what Josh is saying. We're seeing a lot of living off the land of attacks, where they're using RMM tools, they're using, you know, certain processes that and Windows processes that are already built into the environment to be able to launch attacks. And so that every day, like we see that every day, and we take response action. We stop it. We stop that process from running. We block the IP. We, you know, reset the credential. It no longer went any further. And so, what, you know, did they stop a big attack? Probably. Did they do everything they were supposed to do? Yes. You know, and that's what we want to encourage for our analysts is like, you know, it might seem small, but if this is a large company, a large corporation, you may have just found the initial access into the environment and you've completely stopped that attack from going on. And then Josh kind of talked about it earlier, is like, what else could we do to help them? And, you know, let's look at your environment. Can we, you know, add a WAF? Can we, you know, put in some network monitoring in place? Can we, you know, patch some vulnerabilities, and whatever we need to do to help mitigate this threats from happening again in the future. And so, you know, that's that human-led aspect, you know, taking that knowledge, that understanding of those attacks that we see day in, day out, and going, how can I help and, you know, make our customers better? So, you know, honestly, what happens is it reduces the noise for them, but also helps our customers and protects them in the long run.
So there's no champagne popping when you guys do something significant. It's just run of the mill, and it's like a oiled operation that it just keeps going, and the customer is safer than it was yesterday and happier without having to think about it much, right?
And I think that's, you captured it perfectly, is there's no champagne popping. You know, these analysts come in, you know, knowing that they're probably not going to get a lot of recognition for the things that they're doing day in, day out. You know, we all want to find that big new 0 day and be able to go, this new ransomware group is targeting the healthcare sector, and let's put that out on social media. Let's put that out there into the universe so we can get our name and our brand better. But most of the work that our analysts are doing day in, day out goes unnoticed by the customer, and let alone the industry. But it does make us better. It does make us stronger. And, you know, and then hopefully we're pivoting that information back into the people that are in the operation, but also into the technologies that we use to make those more effective.
So to your point about being the really unsung heroes of the operation, and not being publicly known for the results, and in which we know, like, there's obviously different kind of researchers and cybersecurity experts out in the field who are motivated by reputation, by, you know, being known. Others are driven by money, whatever the reason. So what drives you guys in these roles, and what makes you individually excited to keep doing the work?
I mean, finding people that are passionate about it, that, you know, when they do discover these things and they stop these attacks. It's not always about the recognition, but for my side, from my role, I do like to give that recognition to our analysts. We have top performers every quarter that we like to call out. We like to, make sure that the company understands who these people are, and mention their names and things like that. But some of these guys are very humble, with the way they are, but they just enjoy doing what they do day in and day out, and being able to realize what I did and accomplished is so important to them. It's just a lot of people don't get to see that, right? And so we try to do the best we can, at least internally, to give these guys recognition and call outs. Sometimes we like to, offer them to be a part of maybe this kind of podcast, or being able to write blogs or tippers and things like that can be sent out that has their name on it. There's different ways you can do it in that way, but like I said, a lot of these guys are pretty humble, and they're very passionate about what they do. It's not solely based on just a job, but it runs through them.
Yeah, for me being here in this seat, trying to get really interesting and fascinating professionals from the industry on, who don't normally look into a camera, is even more motivated for me, just because I know a lot of these things kind of go under the radar. From the customer perspective, from a marketing perspective, the operation works flawlessly. That's what it's designed to do. You're buying into this capability, and your business is safe, so that's what you want to see. And then of course, that's fine. Maybe maybe we don't need to have a celebration at the end of every successful thing. But the problem with this having a repeated effect is that we never learn anything about the people who actually do the work, who they are, what drives them, how they get these things accomplished. And honestly, frankly, they don't ever tell the good stories that people would appreciate to hear. So that's what that's what we're doing here. So obviously, thank you for making it out of the dungeon. But but yeah, it was always fascinating to me that these people don't really seek that recognition directly, but they get the enjoyment of what they do through the effects of their work, to the extent of saving large operations out there. So curiosity is obviously one of the things that defines a good analyst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, curiosity. I think that's that analytical mindset that they have, the want and the drive to ask questions, and then to have enough knowledge and capabilities to go and get the answers for those questions. And so, we talk, like you just kind of brought up earlier about, operations like a living organism. And so, we have those level 1 analysts, those entry level analysts who, coming in, they have 1,000 questions. They learned about something in college and high school, from a blog, and they want to know everything they can. And so their questions are kind of all over the place. But and then it goes into, as they evolve, their questions become more pointed, more directed. Their hypotheses become better, and they're able to not only understand the questions they're asked, but able to go and find the answers. And then, that's where that level 2 analyst, that next level is that their questions are better, they're more effective, they know how to use the technology. And then you go into that level 3, it's like, I know all the questions, I know how to use the technology, I have the expert, but now I'm here for the crazy scenarios, the things, the out of the box thinking, to push them go, all right, I know this is the normal, but I'm not seeing the normal here. So what are the other questions I can ask? Where are the other hypotheses that I can build to find how the attack might evolve, or how the attacker got in? And then, in operations, it's also intelligence. How do we bring in intelligence teams and intelligence data to help reinforce that analysis and those questions? And so we have dedicated intel teams that are built into that operation to make them, to provide that data, that analysis, that intel, to help further their understanding of the threats. And then, the team leads to help push and motivate our analysts to kind of continue to go further, to follow the process and procedures, to make sure the outcome is the same, but also to unblock them when they become blocked by their analysis. And, that's a right team lead can really help drive a incident effectively, and make the outcome what is needed in a quick and effective way. And so, all of those teams members coming together, and into an operation is what makes us so effective, and then supported by the process and procedures that leadership sets in place, by the technology that is brought into the operation, by the feedback loop back into the organization, but also the wider cybersecurity company makes operations effective. And so all of that, like you mentioned earlier, like is a living, breathing organism that is what helps drive and protect our customers' data.
And there's a competitive nature to it too.
Okay.
I know myself when I first got into cyber as an L1 analyst going through the things, for me, it was competitive. You have defense and you have offense. And if you asked probably any one of our analysts in the SOC, probably every single one of them's a gamer, playing video games. And it's kind of like that. You almost treat it as a video game sometimes. You're trying to defend, keep these attackers out. Then you have your other guys that are doing the offensive to try to get ahead of the attackers and try to figure out what they can get into. And so you have this competitive nature in the SOC as well. When you treat it that way, it kind of makes it more fun, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. I totally get it. As a part-time gamer, no, absolutely. And I feel like competitiveness is in a game theory situation is it keeps on giving. Actually, is there competition between you guys as well? That's what I'm hearing, or just between?
A little bit, I think so.
I mean, nobody's going to see the podcast, so you're safe to say they're not going to know that you are. But yeah, no, I'm curious.
I mean, we want to be
the
the best, right? We want to be the best company out there, obviously, and a lot of other companies are the same way, right? So we're always pushing and driving and trying to figure out how to improve, how to get better. And so, for me, it's always about constant improvement on my process procedures. How can we get faster, more accurate data? And, ultimately, like I said, the competitive nature of trying to get this attacker out or prevent them altogether. So, yeah.
I mean, analysts are competitive in nature. You have your ones that are perfectly fine with, sitting there, knocking out the queue, moving on to the next step. But you have others who, all right, I've done that part. What is the next level? What does that look like for me? How do I have improved myself? And so, that training part of it, but also throwing them against harder and harder attacks that we see, and then challenging them to, push themselves to like, all right, what would you do? What would you change out of this process to make it better? And so, we start to push on these people to grow them as not only team members, but also to help them become leaders. And so, you'll notice not everyone is like that. Some like, to sit back behind the scenes, but I think, we don't always want that people. We want the competitive nature out of them. We want the people that ask questions, that are looking to grow themselves. And I think that makes a better operation overall. Personally, been in operations for over 20 years now, both with the military and the cybersecurity world. And, the people that end up doing the best out of it are the ones that don't sit behind the scenes, the ones that get involved, the ones that are sharing their expertise and trying to grow the operation and make it better. And then, that's where that competitive side is like, all right, I challenge the norm to see if I can make it a little bit better. And sometimes you got to accept that is the way it is and it works effectively. But sometimes you can go, all right, let's make it a little bit better, because I think it'll make us a lot quicker, being better able to detect that threat in the future.
To your point about the future, I feel like a lot of that knowledge that you put in to improve the process feels like a natural progression. But what do you think is the future for the analyst on the front line?
That's a great question. I think as we're evolving more with AI and things like that, it's kind of slowly shifting. I don't think that analysts are going to be replaced necessarily anytime soon, but it's kind of getting to that place where technology is coming into play and keeping that analyst active and ahead of, and the technology itself, and understanding the flaws in it, because there has to be people behind it driving that. But yes, I mean, it's a really good question to see, how we evolve into that.
Yeah, I think it's number one is, reducing the gaps of of our analysts, thinning out the differences between an L1 and L2 and L3. I think AI, LLMs are going to help with that, and they are already helping with that. You're also looking at a way that contextualizing large amount of data. And you mentioned right at the beginning, every environment's different. So how do we use AI? How do we use technology to understand these environments better and more completely? Because then that will help us understand the baseline better. What is normal admin activity, what is normal activity for that one specific user. And so using data in a way that we've always wanted to do it, but it's very hard to do with humans, is going to be like the next evolution. Large data sets being contextualized, given to an analyst, and then letting analysts go, yes, this makes sense. I don't need to pivot. I don't need to investigate anything else. Let's take action. Let's move forward. But I still think, you're going to see, customers don't want the robot making decisions in their environment. Customers want the humans. They want the people on the front lines that have the expertise and have seen those attacks, being the ones responsible for that. Whether that's because they need someone to look at and talk to or yell at, or they just feel better, more comfortable knowing that someone is behind the scenes watching and monitoring that. So
Yeah, your levels will kind of adjust with data responsibilities. What used to be an L1 analyst and what they do on a day-to-day is probably going to shift a bit as technology comes in, LLMs become better, getting in front of some of that busy work, if you will, that'll allow them to now make these decisions, capturing that busy work's done now. Now we want to make the decisions here and where to go from there. So I think it'll evolve as what a typical L1 used to do is going to change a little bit.
So it's still a progression. Honestly, counterintuitively to me, it sounds like an analyst with more technology, be it LLMs and AI or knowledge, is a much more powerful resolve. So it's kind of counterintuitively probably more powerful position to be in than just ideally being replaced, or somebody imagined it was going to be a complete replacement through AI. So it's an interesting thing to monitor. And with that, I guarantee that I might get you back on at a future episode and we could talk about this to see how it evolves. But I want to thank you for all the work that you do, seen and unseen, for being on the front line. And I want to remind everybody, as I'm thanking you, that this is the only place where we get people from the front line in front of everybody to understand those things that are not seen in cybersecurity. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining another episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline. I will see you on the next one.